Visit licensureexams.com and try our samples completely free of charge.
Welcome to another episode covering an area you need to know. I'm Eric, and I've got an interesting topic for today. Today, we're diving deep into the world of B.F. Skinner. B.F. Skinner was one of the most influential psychologists of the 20th century. He developed a school of thought known as radical behaviorism, which focused exclusively on observing and measuring outward, overt behaviors rather than speculating about internal mental states or cognitive processes. This approach is known as methodological or psychological behaviorism. Skinner rejected theories that attributed behavior to hypothetical constructs like personality traits or stages, and instead developed the philosophy of radical behaviorism based on the premise that the study of behavior should be a natural science, akin to chemistry or biology, without reference to unobservable mental states involving sense experience, pleasure, pain, satisfaction, or such. The role of the environment in controlling, shaping, and maintaining behavior through reinforcement was core to his theories. Skinner developed experimental research methods, including a specialized box known as an operant conditioning chamber, or Skinner box, to study changes in observable behavior as a function of environmental changes. He focused extensively on studying operant conditioning, which involves reinforcing voluntary responses and actions, in contrast to classical Pavlovian conditioning, which focuses on involuntary reflex responses. Basic assumption. Radical behaviorism makes several basic assumptions. Psychology should be the science of behavior, not of internal mental states which are subjective. Behavior is shaped by positive and negative reinforcements in the environment, which increase, strengthen, or decrease, weaken future behavior likelihood. Mental terms and cognitive processes do not explain behavior or provide verifiable causes. They speculate about inner mechanisms, studying outer functional relationships. Experimental control and manipulation of environmental variables is essential to show functional relationships with behavior. Environmental histories of reinforcement shape an organism's behavioral repertoire over time. Key concepts. Radical behaviorism centers on key interrelated concepts in understanding and analyzing behavior. Reinforcement. Reinforcement strengthens operant behavior, and the likelihood that an instrumental response preceding reinforcement will be repeated by an organism in the future. Positive reinforcement involves presenting a stimulus after a response, whereas negative reinforcement involves removing or avoiding an aversive stimulus. Skinner studied various schedules of reinforcement, showing how rates of responding are modified by consequences. Respondent behavior, operant behavior. Respondent behavior is elicited automatically by antecedent stimuli, whereas operant behavior is emitted and involves reinforcement consequences shaping future voluntary behaviors. Operants involve an active organism operating on its environment, whereas classical conditioning involves involuntary responses. Shaping. Skinner demonstrated shaping by differentially reinforcing successive approximations towards a target behavior. Complex skills can be taught through gradual, stepwise reinforcement without needing punishment or aversive control. Target behaviors are broken down into small, achievable steps. Conditioning, operant conditioning, differs from classical SR conditioning by involving reinforcement punishment consequences following voluntary operant responses. Operants are voluntarily emitted by an organism not due to preceding stimuli. Consequences influence future probability of operant responses. Stimulus control. Stimuli associated with past reinforcement punishment acquire the ability to control behavior by evoking responses previously associated with those consequences. discriminative stimuli signal, likely reinforcement vs non-reinforcement, and exert control over relevant behavior in their presence. Case study: reducing neck tics through differential reinforcement. Skinner's principles have implications for applied behavior analysis and modification in clinical settings. As an example case, consider Josiah, a 9-year-old boy who engages in frequent neck tics. Especially when under stress, Josiah exhibits repetitive jerking tics of his neck roughly 1 per minute. This causes muscle tension, fatigue, peer teasing, and interference with his ability to focus during class. The goal is to reduce Josiah's neck tic frequency through behavioral modification. After consultation with parents and teachers, Josiah is started on a daily tracking system using an electronic timer attached to his shirt to record the frequency and timing of his tics throughout school days. Baseline data indicates they average 60 tics per 6-hour school day. Using principles of operant conditioning, a structured behavioral intervention will be utilized to differentially reinforce lower rates of neck tics and teach replacement behavior through alternative non-tic movements. Josiah collaborates on setting a goal of achieving less than 30 neck tics per day to reduce fatigue and interference with concentration. For each school day under 30 tics, Josiah earns 5 preferred Pokemon cards. Even larger rewards are given if he achieves 5, 10, and eventually 20 tic-free hours as successive goals. The intervention involves no punishment, only incrementally moving reinforcement criteria as Josiah's tic rate gradually improves. Josiah also learns to engage in alternative competing responses when he feels urged to tic, such as looking left or right, repeatedly or slowly moving his head down to his chest and back. These subtle movements replace the more overt neck tics. Over a 6-week intervention, Josiah reaches an average below 15 tics per day, meeting his initial goal. Analysis indicates the differential reinforcement and alternative response training successfully reduced interfering neck tics substantially compared to baseline without need for punishment or unwarranted diagnosis of neurological pathology. Ongoing reinforcement helps ensure long-term maintenance of therapeutic gains. This case example demonstrates Skinner's principles of reinforcement shaping new behavioral repertoires, stimulus control through alternative responses, data-driven analysis rather than diagnostic labels, and focus on environmentally mediated behavior change. In summary, the key terms you need to know are reinforcement, any stimulus change immediately following an operant response, which increases the future probability of that response. Punishment, any stimulus change immediately following an operant response, which decreases the future probability of that response. Can involve presenting aversive stimuli or removing appetitive stimuli. Shaping, incrementally reinforcing successive approximations to gradually obtain a desired terminal behavior that lacks an initial reinforcement history. Extinction, withholding reinforcement for a previously reinforced response leading to a decreased rate or eventual cessation of responding. Discriminative stimulus, an antecedent stimulus that signals likely reinforcement will follow a specific operant response in its presence, but not its absence. Exerts stimulus control over differential responding. Schedule of reinforcement. Rule specifying the parameters determining reinforcement delivery following operant responses based on ratio, interval, or other criteria. Pattern of reinforcement presentation following responses. Operant conditioning chamber, experimental apparatus Skinner box containing a small enclosure for animal subjects with devices to deliver reinforcements, present stimuli, and record target operant responses such as lever presses. Radical behaviorism, The philosophy initiated by Skinner that psychology should experimentally study observable behavior in relation to environmental histories rather than appealing to hypothetical inner mechanisms, mental states, or mediating cognitions. Methodological behaviorism. Approach maintaining psychology should restrict itself to studying objectively observable behavior without speculating about subjective internal experiences that cannot be objectively measured or experimentally manipulated. Experimental analysis of behavior, Skinner's term for measuring quantifiable relationships between modification of environmental variables and effects on rates or forms of measurable operant behavior exhibited by subjects deriving functional relations through replicable experiments. This concludes an overview of Skinner's radical behaviorism.